June 5th, 1944. A damp wind crawls off the English Channel, carrying the iron scent of tide and tar. In a windowless brick building in the west of London, a place the ordinary world would never see on a map, a single radio room glows with wavering filaments and the steady pulse of Morse. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the metallic click of teleprinters. Men and women in civilian coats bend over racks of valves and coils, their faces lit by the cold light of oscilloscopes. Outside, across the city, road signs say one thing and the war says another. You are there with them. You can feel the low thrum of engines from the docks, distant and constant like a heartbeat. A radio operator named Thomas, thin, steady-handed, with a voice that has known bad weather and worse orders, eases his fingers across the key. He breathes, listens to the hiss, and begins to send. A string of groupings meant to look like routine traffic from a Corps headquarters. The message is deliberately bland. Unit personnel reports, supply requests, maintenance logs, nothing that would alarm a careless ear. But each line is a thread in a web. Across the Channel, in occupied France, German listening posts sweep the ether. Their men are trained to find meaning in the mundane. They have become masters of inference. When they hear a unit complaining of bilge pumps and shore leave, when they intercept the steady, human rhythm of a headquarters speaking about training schedules and supply convoys, they map those signals onto a map of expectation. A radio voice complaining about muddy bivouacs, a clerk requesting extra bedding, a colonel's polite reprimand about field discipline. These are, to them, the living evidence of a formation's existence. But these are not ordinary radio voices. They are actors in a carefully staged drama. The British deception plan, known in dim corridors and whispered memos as Operation Fortitude, has one cruel aim: turn sound into substance. It must make the German High Command believe in armies that do not exist. It must convince them that the main Allied invasion will fall not in Normandy, but at Pas-de-Calais, where the shortest crossing and the ideal ports sit waiting. To sell that lie, the Allies conjure the First United States Army Group, FUSAG, a phantom led by a very real man with a very public reputation, General George S. Patton.
Patton's image is the hook. His swagger, the gleam of his medals, the force of his name, all of it is bait. The Germans admire Patton, they fear him. So the deception places his shadow where the real blow should not fall. British planners feed the rumor mills with photographs, public sightings, and forged correspondence. But the sound of an army, the chatter of headquarters, and the clatter of supply has its own persuasive power. It is the texture of reality. That texture will be woven with wire, valve, and human cunning. In basements like this one, the operators are not merely sending false reports, they are fabricating a life. They schedule traffic to mirror what a real Corps would sound like. Early morning situation reports, afternoon logistical updates, evening morale messages. They create the banality of Army life because banality is believable. They teach their clerks to mimic mistakes. A mistyped group here, a repeated phrase there, small errors that yield the impression of authenticity. They time messages to match truck convoys that do not run and to suggest radio silence that will never be broken. But sound alone would not have sufficed. The British deception machine is more ambitious. Physical props are shipped to the south coast. Inflatable tanks, wooden landing craft, even entire camps of dummy vehicles and canvas tents. Reconnaissance flights photograph these decoys and feed the images back through channels the Germans trust. On the ground, engineers build fake supply dumps, complete with rations, tins, and discarded packaging to be spotted from the air. In the skies, specially scheduled bomber and reconnaissance runs create the illusion of practice maneuvers. Every sensory cue points to the same falsehood. Back in the radio room, an intercepted German operator laughs softly at a message about a petty supply dispute. He tapes the message into an intelligence file, where an analyst will draw lines and arrows on a map. The Germans like maps. They trust what can be plotted. Every received message is a piece of the picture. The British double-cross system, a network of turned German agents working for London, adds another layer of credibility. These agents, including a handful who will become legendary, feed carefully tailored reports to German handlers, confirming aspects of the Phantom Army the wireless traffic implies. The deception is multi-layered. Noise on the air reinforced by the human voice the enemy believes they know.
At the heart of fortitude are the planners, men like Dudley Clark, who first experimented with deception in North Africa and gave birth to the art of creating armies of smoke and mirrors, and officers who labor late into the night plotting radio schedules, calibrating the cadence of fake supply convoys, and deciding where to place an inflatable Sherman for the camera. They argue over the smallest details. Should a battalion complain about rations in a northern dialect or a southern one? Because details breed trust. On the other side of the Channel, German generals begin to act. They move divisions into reserve around Calais, shift panzer formations close to the Pas-de-Calais beaches, and pour reconnaissance effort into the Phantom concentration. They do this not because a single message convinced them, but because hundreds of small corroborating voices created a chorus. The radio that was supposed to warn them of the Normandy landings instead built the illusion that the real invasion would come elsewhere. Confidence in the false report hardens into strategy. In a small room at the head of one of the British deception units, a young officer named Margaret, her hair pinned back, her uniform neat, her pen scratching tiny, precise letters, composes a report that will be sent under the guise of a core radio net. She plants references to a sandy training area near Dover and slips in a comment about the availability of ferry crews. It is a throwaway line meant to be noticed and recorded. She knows the German listener will hang on every hint. Her calm handwriting will become a general's certainty. Outside, the Channel tides keep turning, indifferent. Men in landing craft wait on the real invasion beaches, where dogs bark and soldiers whistle under nervous breaths. Somewhere between the mock camps and the live troops, the line between reality and performance blurs. When the morning comes and the armadas of invasion cross the water, the Germans will look for the main strike where the sound told them it would be, at Calais. The deception will not just mislead maps, it will buy time, precious hours and days, to secure the lodgment of the Allies on the real beaches. Tonight, the radio keeps talking. The room hums with the small, steady noises of plotting. The British are not just sending messages, they are building belief. They are placing a voice in the enemy's ear and teaching him to listen in the wrong direction. It is an intimate kind of warfare, fought with ink and key, with a patience that mirrors the slow, unstoppable sweep of the tide.
By dawn, the illusion was no longer just a whisper on the airwaves. It had weight. It had presence. Across the English countryside, from Canterbury to Dover, quiet hillsides began to look suspiciously like staging grounds for invasion. Rows of trucks stood in neat formation, all rubber and air, but convincing at a glance. Wooden gliders and plywood aircraft gleamed under camouflage nets. Even from a few hundred feet up, they looked authentic enough for a Luftwaffe camera lens. To anyone driving past, these sites were restricted areas, guarded by men in military police uniforms who didn't exist in any real order of battle. At night, Fake lights blinked in tent rows, engines revved, loudspeakers played the ambient sound of soldiers shouting and machinery clanking. The deception had become theater, an entire army constructed out of noise, light, and rumor. It was called Fortitude South, and its success depended on one dangerous truth: the Germans wanted to believe it. They had already convinced themselves that any rational invasion would strike at Calais. It was the shortest route, closest to German airfields, and offered direct access to the heart of occupied France. It made too much sense. The Allies only had to reinforce that belief until it became unshakable. At Supreme Headquarters, British and American intelligence officers watched the deception unfold with careful satisfaction. Colonel John Bevan, the mastermind behind the London Controlling Section, reviewed the traffic logs like a playwright studying his script. Each false signal, each dummy radio exchange was another line of dialogue in a drama meant to keep Hitler's gaze fixed in the wrong place. In the German High Command, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, reports began to accumulate. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed massive concentrations of vehicles near Dover. Radio direction finding traced Corps headquarters traffic consistent with the presence of the 1st U.S. Army Group. Their agents in Britain, many now double-crossed by MI5, relayed sightings of Patton inspecting troops near the supposed embarkation ports. To the Germans, it was proof. To the Allies, it was validation that the deception had taken root. Even the choice of General George S. Patton was deliberate genius. The Allies understood how deeply the Germans respected and feared him. After his dismissal following the slapping incident in Sicily, Patton's sudden reappearance at the head of Fusag was too tempting a piece of evidence for German intelligence to ignore. Propaganda photos and leaked briefings helped reinforce his supposed command. The man himself played his part brilliantly, touring southeastern England in plain view of German spies, inspecting dummy tanks and inflated landing craft as if preparing for war. Meanwhile, in the radio rooms, the deception deepened. Operators simulated the chatter of entire divisions. They used prearranged traffic codes, message lengths, and call signs that mimicked authentic U.S. Army communications. A staff officer might complain about supply shortages at Folkestone. Another would report training casualties during amphibious drills. Each fabricated complaint was more powerful than 100 speeches. It sounded routine. It sounded human. And that was what made it deadly convincing. Back in occupied France, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt's intelligence officers pored over the data. Their analysts drew red arrows across maps, pointing towards Calais. The deception had become its own feedback loop. Each false report confirmed the assumptions of the last. Rundstedt reinforced his coastal defenses there, pulling veteran panzer divisions north, precisely as Allied planners had hoped. For Hitler himself, it was a matter of conviction. When the first reports of the Normandy landings arrived on June 6th, the Führer refused to believe it was the real invasion. He saw it as a diversion, a feint meant to lure his armies away from Calais. The main blow is yet to come, he told his staff. Patton will lead it. Even as Allied troops stormed ashore under murderous fire, the German 15th Army, nearly 20 divisions strong, remained frozen in Calais, waiting for an attack that would never arrive. The deception, born in static and shadows, had achieved the impossible. It had paralyzed the enemy. Weeks passed. Allied forces broke out from Normandy, pushing inland. Still, the Germans hesitated, still believing that the true invasion, Patton's phantom force, would appear any day. By the time they realized the truth, the Allies had already liberated Paris. In London, the radio operators who had spent endless nights crafting lies were quietly congratulated. There were no medals, no public ceremonies. Their work was too secret for that. Yet they knew what they had accomplished. The men and women of fortitude had turned illusion into armor. They had built an army out of sound and smoke. and won a battle without firing a shot. And somewhere in a damp bunker in France, a German signal officer stared at a silent receiver, wondering how he could have been fooled by voices that never existed.
June 7, 1944. The sun rose over France in a haze of smoke and confusion. From Berlin to Saint-Germain, teletypes clattered with messages that sounded like panic wearing the mask of certainty. Reports flooded in. Allied paratroopers near Caen, warships offshore, bridges taken intact. Yet at Hitler's command post, deep in the woods of the Ardennes, disbelief reigned supreme. The Führer, exhausted and drugged by the steady rhythm of sedatives, paced before a map scattered with colored pins. "This," he muttered to his adjutant, "is the feint. The real invasion is coming at Calais." Around him, generals stood in uneasy silence. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel and General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations, exchanged quick glances. Their intelligence files all agreed the 1st U.S. Army Group, led by Patton, was still in southeastern England. Reconnaissance planes had photographed vast camps, fleets of landing craft, and miles of fuel depots opposite Calais. The radio intercepts confirmed active command networks. Every sign pointed north. So when the 21st Panzer Division begged permission to counterattack the Normandy beaches, the order that came down was simple: hold position. The Führer's personal reserve, the armored divisions near Paris, were not to move. They are for the main blow, the attack on Calais. And thus the greatest amphibious invasion in history unfolded while the enemy stood still. In England, the deception machine didn't rest. The operators of Fortitude South intensified their work to maintain the illusion. They transmitted new traffic, suggesting that Patton's fictitious army was delayed by weather and logistical issues. The Phantom units continued to train for an assault on the Pas-de-Calais beaches. Intercepted messages complained of constant delays in embarkation orders. German analysts, eager to confirm what their Führer already believed, accepted these as proof. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence, through decoded Enigma transmissions, listened to the German confusion in real time. The British Ultra Network read reports confirming that the deception was holding. Hitler still refused to release the Calais forces. To the planners in London, that single decision was worth more than any bomb. Inside the supreme headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force, General Eisenhower received the Ultra Intercept summaries each morning. They showed that the Germans were continuing to expect Patton's main attack at Calais for weeks after D-Day. As long as they did, his beachhead in Normandy could grow stronger. Every tank, every truck, every ton of ammunition landed under that protection owed its safety to a lie that whispered over the radio. By late June, reality and illusion had intertwined so tightly that even experienced German officers struggled to separate them. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, surveying the reports, told a colleague, "The enemy has far greater resources than we imagined. 2 invasions at once, Normandy and Calais." He didn't know that one of those invasions existed only in sound. The deception extended beyond radio. Operation Quicksilver, a subcomponent of Fortitude, ensured that the Allied air forces bombed fake supply dumps and dummy airfields near Dover to lend credibility. The RAF even dropped radar-reflecting strips of foil, window, to simulate large formations of aircraft moving toward Calais. German radar screens glowed with phantom fleets. It was a symphony of misdirection. In the occupied French countryside, resistance fighters noticed the German troop buildup near Calais. Entire panzer divisions were held in reserve, the 15th Army waiting for the order that never came. Meanwhile, real Allied soldiers bled and fought through hedgerows, inching their way toward Caen and Saint-Lô. For them, every hour of German inaction was survival. Weeks turned into months. The deception continued long after D-Day itself. It wasn't until late July, when Allied armor finally broke through at Saint-Lô and swept across France, that the German command began to realize the truth. there would be no second invasion. The first U.S. Army group had never existed. By then, it was too late. The Allies had landed over 1 million men in France. Paris would be liberated within weeks. In Berlin, when the reports finally reached Hitler's inner circle, they were met with denial. The English are masters of deceit, Keitel admitted bitterly. But what none of them could grasp was how deeply that deceit had worked, not just through intelligence, but through psychology. The British understood something fundamental. Hitler trusted patterns that confirmed his own convictions. He wanted to believe Calais was the key. Fortitude didn't fight that belief. It fed it, nurtured it, and let it grow until it became doctrine. In that sense, the deception wasn't just a trick of radio waves. It was a mirror held up to the German mind. Back in the quiet London offices where Fortitude had been born, the operators packed up their gear. The fake nets went silent. The rooms that once hummed with Morse now echoed with nothing but the ticking of clocks. Their work had ended, not with a cheer, but with the steady silence of victory achieved through invisibility. They had built ghosts, and the ghosts had won.
August 1944. The roads of Normandy were clogged with the twisted remains of tanks and trucks. The German 7th Army was collapsing, surrounded near Falaise. Allied convoys rumbled eastward, dust clouds rising like ghosts over the wheat fields. The deception, once a fragile illusion, had become a historical force, shaping the end of the war itself. In London, the men and women who had orchestrated Operation Fortitude watched reports from France with quiet pride. There would be no public parades for them, no medals pinned on their coats. Their work was too secret for headlines, but they knew, in the silence of their radio rooms, in the dim glow of their oscilloscopes, that their words, their fake voices, had saved tens of thousands of real lives. Colonel John Bevan, head of the London Controlling Section, stood before a wall of maps marked with colored pins. Each pin represented a lie, a fake unit, a dummy division, a phantom corps, and each one had bought the Allies time. Without those delays, German reinforcements from Calais might have reached Normandy in the first crucial days of the invasion. The beaches could have been driven into the sea. The war might have taken a darker turn. Across the Channel, captured German officers were beginning to piece together the scope of their deception. At an interrogation center in Belgium, one intelligence officer, a weary colonel from the 15th Army, confessed with disbelief. "We were sure Patton was still in England. The wireless was full of his men. We had the positions marked on every map." When Allied interrogators told him that the entire army had been an illusion, made of radio traffic, inflatable tanks, and fake supply dumps, the man reportedly laughed. "Impossible," he said. "We heard them every night." What made Fortitude truly remarkable was its precision. It wasn't just noise meant to confuse. It was an exact, living simulation. Every fake signal had a purpose, every message a chain of consequence. The operators weren't improvising. They were performing a calculated symphony of falsehoods. Each of the phantom divisions had its own radio net, complete with call signs and communication schedules that mirrored real-world usage. The Third Signal Company might transmit messages to Corps headquarters at specific hours, followed by supply and medical updates. Allied radio intelligence monitored the output constantly to ensure it matched the patterns of genuine U.S. forces. Even the spacing between transmissions, the rhythm of the clicks, was tuned to mimic real operators' habits. The deception reached a level of artistry that defied imagination, and yet it all rested on one fragile assumption:
that the enemy would trust their own ears more than their doubts. By late 1944, the secret was buried under the chaos of victory. Allied soldiers joked about the rubber army that fooled the Führer, but few knew how close the ruse had come to failure. In early June, a single captured German agent had almost exposed the entire operation. But MI5's double-cross committee intercepted him before he could send his report. Another agent, Garbo, Juan Pujol Garcia, one of the war's most successful double agents, reinforced the deception by feeding Berlin eyewitness accounts of Patton's movements and false invasion timetables. His fictional network of sub-agents, entirely invented, became one of the most trusted intelligence sources in Hitler's command. When the war ended, Garbo received both an Iron Cross from Germany and an MBE from Britain, awards from both sides for the same lie. As the Allies advanced through France, Hitler's refusal to accept the truth became tragic. Even in August, when American armor was closing in on Paris, he continued to expect a second landing at Calais. The divisions guarding that coast remained there until September, idle, untouched, useless. The most powerful army in Europe had been blinded not by force, but by faith in its own logic. The German command believed what it wanted to believe. Fortitude had only given them the evidence. In later years, military historians would call it one of the greatest deceptions in modern warfare, a masterpiece of strategy and psychology. Operation Fortitude didn't just protect the D-Day landings, it reshaped the entire timeline of liberation. Normandy succeeded because Calais waited for ghosts. When peace finally returned to London, the radio operators who had lived in secrecy went home to quiet lives. The equipment was dismantled, the fake nets dismantled, the scripts burned. Yet some of them, the night shift men who had tapped those rhythmic keys in smoky rooms, would admit decades later that they sometimes missed it. You start to believe in the voices you invent. It's strange. You build an army that doesn't exist, and somehow it starts to feel real. Theirs was a victory won not with bullets or bombs, but with words, measured, coded, and deliberate. And as historians would later write, when the Allies crossed the Channel in June 1944, they did not sail alone. They were accompanied by an army of ghosts, 1 million men who never lived, who never marched, but who, in their silent, invisible way, helped to free a continent.